Good afternoon from Hamilton. I'm Karen McQuigge. I'm the Alumni Director at McMaster, and I'm so pleased that you've been able to join us for our webinar, Living and Working Abroad. And today's session is focusing on our graduates who are either in or have lived in the UK. Today in Hamilton, we have gray skies, so I think that matches up to the London skies. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by Rich, Joe, and Kirsten as we have a conversation about their decision to work and live abroad. We're going to post their bio information in the chat so you can follow along through that. As well as we indicated earlier, feel free at any time to post in a question and we'll do our best to answer all questions. And I'm going to send our apologies for our fourth panelist today. Sammy was unfortunately under the weather and not able to join us. Sammy lives in Dublin. So if anybody who's watching today has any questions specifically about an Irish experience, he would be happy to answer them after. So you can reach out to us in the alumni office and we are happy to connect you to Sammy. So Rich, Kirsten, and Joe, thank you again for joining us. And we're going to start off with our conversation sort of going back into your student days. And each of you studied something different at McMaster. Joe, history and geography, Kirsten, economics, and Rich, business. So why don't we jump into what a favorite question that we usually like to ask people is, what's the best lesson you learned about during your time at Mac? And was it inside or outside of the classroom? And I think I'm going to start with Kirsten today. So what was the best lesson you learned at Mac?
That's such a tough question. There's so many lessons to learn, both kind of personally and professionally. But I think for me, from a professional standpoint, is kind of, I learned my love for economics. I know that sounds really nerdy to say, but it's really there that I kind of pieced it together, the kind of impact that economics could make, and I could have a career out of it. So that was ultimately kind of the key lesson I took from it. And that's kind of what informed my decision to come to UK, which I can get to later.
Excellent. Rich, what was your best lesson, inside or outside the classroom?
It's a bit of both, actually, and it was just make sure you're enjoying the experience. I had to take a few months away from uni in my first year, so I was behind the curve in every sense of the way. So I just had to think about, am I really enjoying this? And that led to me taking a year off after first year, which led to sort of why I'm in London today. So I guess it's just make sure you're enjoying what you're putting your time into.
And Joe, what about you?
Certainly outside of the classroom, we're trying to experience as much as possible to discover what it is that you love. And for me, that ended up being sort of politics and government, which started my career there. So it really helped shape my focus more outside of the classroom, although I did love my courses and they helped me quite a bit.
So Rich, let's go back to when you decided to explore an international opportunity. What sort of made you make that decision that after McMaster, you were going to leave Canada and head to the UK to live and work?
So after first year, I actually went to Australia for a year, clear my head and, be able to come back refocused for school. But that was where it all kind of peaked, like living and actually becoming sort of a local citizen, not just traveling somewhere. I actually wanted to go back to Australia, but upon graduation, you realize it's pretty far away. And then your mom steps in and has their opinions as well. So we kind of thought about where we could go, and my partner is British, so it was very easy to get a short-term visa. So I was able to come here for 2.5 years. So it just made sense. If you're going to travel somewhere, the UK is very similar to Canada in many respects. So it's not the hardest place to move to, although there's lots of differences as well. But that started there. Australia was the stepping stone, and then UK.
Excellent. Kirsten, what about you? When did you make your decision that you were going to pursue live abroad and work in the UK?
I guess the interest peaked after university for me. It was after I graduated McMaster that I did my first kind of Euro trip, and London was one of the stops. And I thought to myself, oh, it'd be really cool to just live somewhere else for a bit. And that was my first trip on my own without my parents, and just meeting a lot of really cool people. So that's kind of what piqued that interest. And then in terms of actually translating that into something real, it was kind of 4 years after working in consulting at KPMG in the Toronto office, kind of started speaking to people within different KPMG firms across the world, really, and trying to find which office really aligned to my interest, and London was the most aligned, and that's what led me to come here.
And Joe, you have a little bit of a different path, since you were, at McMaster, then you went over to the UK, and now you have returned, so you're living in Ottawa. But why don't you talk a little bit about your decision to depart and head over to London for a couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I'd always wanted to do. Both of my brothers had lived there at one point, and found it to be a very rewarding experience for them. I actually thought that the opportunity for me to do it had kind of passed by, because I had started my career in Canada. I was fortunate enough then to meet my partner, who is British, and she wanted to move home for a couple of years and said, basically, are you coming with me? So I couldn't pass up that opportunity. One thing we can get into a bit later is I applied for a Tier 5 visa, which is available to Canadians under the age of 30 for 2 years. And it really opens up a lot of doors when you're moving there to get a taste of it and decide whether or not it's for you. So we were there for 2 years, and just like with my brothers, it was an incredibly rewarding experience for me. We did travel. I got to add to my career and to my skills when I was there. So it's something I would recommend to anyone that's interested.
What do you think you learned the most about yourself when you were over there for the time period?
For me, it would have to be resilience. Because I went over there cold, without a job lined up. So, searching for a job in a new country, finding a job, finding out that job wasn't for me, and then just starting the process all over again. It really was the resilience through it. I think, like a lot of Canadians there, I did end up working at a pub for a little while to get through. But discovering that I had that in me to be able to continue to move forward and persevere when it came to those types of obstacles.
So Kirsten, if I remember correctly in your bio and our conversation so far, you were working with KPMG and then decided you wanted to have an international experience and chose the UK. So let's ask a practical question. Did they help you find a spot in their UK operation, help you with the move and whatever, moving expenses and recommending, like how you did, or were you were kind of like, I want to do this, and then I'm off on my own and I've got to figure out how to pay for it and make it work?
No, so it's definitely the former. I was very fortunate that just because it was just kind of an intercompany transfer. So it was a different visa to the one that Joe had mentioned. They made it pretty effortless, to be completely honest with you. So all of the visa aspects, it was the KPMG kind of global mobility team that dealt with it. I was fortunate enough to be given kind of temporary accommodations for 2 weeks. They arranged someone to help me find a place. So it was pretty effortless in that transition part. Excellent.
And Rich, what about you? When you made the decision to go over, I can't recall, did you have a job, or you needed to find a job when you came over, and your moving experience and how that went?
Sure. I was at KPMG, and the plan was actually to do the same process as Kirsten did. And we had gone down the process probably midway through, talked to partners, looking at visas, setting everything up, but they had a requirement that you had to come back, and I couldn't guarantee that. So that sort of avenue didn't pan out. And then we started looking at the spousal visa. I'd been with my partner for a long time, and the UK offered a spousal visa at that time that you didn't have to be married, just sort of show a common law. And that visa actually came very easily. I think we sent it away and received a reply in 5 days. So it was all quite shocking at the pace. And that set things in motion. I didn't have a job on arrival. So obviously you had to have the savings as a backup. But I was fortunate to start contracting work, which I'd never done before, and had a job within 2 weeks. So my sort of extended initial holiday abruptly ended. So I guess my comment on that is I had to be open to contract work, which I'd never done. It didn't really suit me at the time, but it did allow easy access to work in the UK.
So both you and Joe went over and had to find a job. So, Rich, any tips that you'd offer people if they're going to make that decision to, like, I'm going to move to the UK for a while and I'll find a job when I'm over there?
I think if you have your basics covered, so, housing, you have a bank account, you can prove all these little things, which are a challenge, were a challenge when I moved here. And I think even more so can be a bit of a hurdle now. It seems to be one requires the other. So you go in circles. So having all of that lined up so you can kind of focus on looking for a job or enjoying your new surroundings rather than being caught up in frustration or stress of logistics. I think, like I mentioned, just being open to other types of work, maybe not necessarily aligned perfectly with your career path. I was auditing at KPMG and I kind of thought I'd never want to go back into that. But then I went to work for a company on the other side. But it's a good stepping stone. And, it took that stress away, and it only lasted 6 months, but the next job came very easily just to get that first bit of UK experience on the CV.
Now, living in Canada and the UK is similar, but there are differences. Joe, you would have had, working in the pub, maybe a little bit of a cultural shock, like the local, hanging out and pouring beer in the local for people. But was there anything that, surprised you when you first moved over? You had to get used to?
Yeah, despite speaking the same language and having the familiarity between the two countries, it is a very different culture to Canada. Canadians, surprisingly, are seen as very a lot more brash, a lot more forward than a lot of British people are, and they're kind of surprised by it. There is, in some cases, a need for a translation in terms of, what people say in a professional setting that might not be the same for us. So there's certainly, having to sort of jump in and get to know people. If you don't go over, like, I was very fortunate. I had my partner, sure, Rich was the same, who could act as a translator, cultural translator when you're there. But finding people that you can trust to help you navigate those processes are important. And then it's, because it is London, there are other parts of the UK as well. I know we're almost exclusively talking about London because that's where most people end up. There is a lot of competition for jobs, and hiring processes can be a bit longer than sort of anything I've experienced in Canada. So just going in with sort of those real expectations, you're probably not going to land and find a job the next day unless you go over with a job. You're going to have to work for it in a way. And it's all part of the learning process there. And I think, like Rich said, once you have that first, London job on your CV, it opens up a lot of doors for you. So learning the professional language in particular and the cultural language, it takes a little while, certainly takes a little while, but learning that certainly helps right off the bat.
Excellent. Kirsten, what about your experience of, moving from Canada, your sort of cultural shock that you might have experienced when you first went into the first day in the job at KPMG London?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's pretty much the same as Joe. I think Canadians are very, outgoing out there, and can be sometimes in your face, whereas I find a lot of British people are more refined and don't really show that emotion. So it's kind of, for me, I'm just so used to having everyone be super friendly and welcoming, and that's not the same way that at least some British people that I've interacted with are. So it's trying to not take that personally, really, and that's just how it is. And just getting used to that, both in a kind of professional setting as well as kind of personal outside of that.
So I'm going to ask a very practical question, since we, the UK is a little bit further ahead than we are in Canada about living with COVID and whatnot. But for Kirsten, for you, do you go into the office every day? Is hybrid okay? Is it what's sort of like the working day for you in London?
Yeah, so I'm actually in the office today, and my team, we've kind of agreed provisionally every Wednesday we try to get into the office so we can do that kind of, the interactions you need to do in person, but more or less we're doing the hybrid work. So I try to go into the office maybe twice a week, but otherwise I'm working from home, and that's pretty much the same attitude for everyone that I'm working with.
Excellent. And Rich, what about you? Are you splitting your time between the office as well?
This is my office. I work for myself now, so
Oh, okay.
I come downstairs in the morning. But the same, I think businesses are starting to go back to the office, and I think each one is feeling out what that looks like for them. But me personally, I only go into the office for meetings, and even those are more likely than not still online.
Yeah.
It really is just say a board meeting or something like that actually requires your attendance. But I think that also, we'll come to this, but it also opens up opportunities, that weren't there prior to COVID.
So we've got a couple of questions that are coming in. We've talked a little bit about the hiring process for all of you. So I'm going to ask the second part of the question from one of our attendees. And Rich, I'll start with you. And if anybody else has something to add after this, then feel free to jump in. But did you find that Canadian universities were did anybody know who McMaster was? Did you have that experience of well, McMaster's in Hamilton, it's a, top 100 university, are Canadian universities known very well in the UK?
I would say no. I think in 12 years here, maybe 2 people had heard of Mac, or even Hamilton for that matter. It's very big city centric. So everyone has a relative in Canada, you'll find that, but they've only really heard of Toronto or Vancouver. I don't think that's necessarily a hurdle. I think one of the things that it goes into what we spoke about earlier is when you first get here, it's really recruiter based here. So you're selling your CV to a recruiter. And once they have a sort of the tick box exercise that you've gone to uni, it's really about your story, not necessarily your uni. So that may play into other places, but I didn't find it to be a positive or a negative here. It was pretty neutral.
Excellent. All right. So Joe, I'm going to ask this next question that came in, and I'm going to ask you. So it's from Patrick. Do you have any comments on how Canada's work experience and education was viewed by employers? Is it a struggle to justify your work experience and degree, or is it considered equivalent?
I found, at least with my experience, that it's considered equivalent. I didn't get too many questions about, oh, how does that translate? It does help if you have prepared yourself to sort of map what you've done onto the position that you're applying for, so that you can say oh, I've done this just, in Toronto, in Hamilton, in Ottawa, wherever. It helped for me. I'm in government affairs, so I was able to say, here's exactly what I was doing, and here is what it would look like in the UK, so that they understood that. And I agree with Rich on universities. They don't know Canadian universities, but they also don't question Canadian universities. So you don't have to worry about that. But no, as long as you come prepared, I think that it's not a hurdle with Canadian experience.
Okay. So Kirsten, we now have a question which was well timed by the person that posed this, because I was going to head into okay, so now you've arrived in the UK, and each of you had knew someone or knew some people over there, but how was it how and where did you network? How did you build your community in your network of friends and colleagues in the UK? Any tips you'd like to offer folks?
Yeah. So yeah, a bit of context. I didn't know anyone going into London. And it was really my first time, living abroad, and kind of growing up in Toronto and having that network, both of family and friends. It was completely different going into London and really not knowing anyone. So to be honest, I had this running joke for anyone that I met in London on my first year is will you be my friend? That's what I would do. And to be honest, it was anyone that knew someone in London, a friend of a friend, would connect me, and I would just say absolutely yes and go for coffee with them. And it honestly felt like dating for friendship. And there were some people who we really clicked, and we're still really great friends to this day, kind of 4 years after moving. And there's some that, after that first coffee chat, I was I don't really see a friendship with you beyond that. And then to be honest, that was the friendship aspect. But then a lot of my friends, to be honest, have been through work. So KPMG, I think particularly, has a lot of has a lot of expats who are also here in kind of the similar position that I'm in, who's, working professionals moving to London to get, that international experience. So the friendships that I've made a lot of really strong friendships just through meeting similar-minded people here at KPMG.
Did you join any Canadian expat groups since you've been over? Like, have you participated in the Canadian sort of network?
Yeah, so there is a Facebook group. I don't know, Richard, Joe, the Canadians in London Facebook group. I've gone to a couple of them. Most recently, there was a Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving pub dinner back in October that I went to. So I like to just see what's going on there as well.
Excellent. So Rich, your tips on, moving to a new country, you had, your partner, so that was great. You had, a small network in his family, his wider family, but what about you? How did you network? How did you build your network?
I think you just have to remember that London is full of expats. So you're not, to say, not blunt, but you're not unique. There's a lot of people here in the same situation. And I think just being open to having those chats and putting yourself out there, will you be my friend? It sounds very Canadian, honestly, but it's kind of what you'd expect. But just put that sort of olive branch out there. Go to the works functions, meet people through work. I think it's incredible how, when my friends find out I was living in London, how their friends that are visiting London become, meet up for coffee. It's just a function of where you live. So just be available to start those friendships. Don't be shy or awkward about it. But I think exactly what Kirsten said is the Canadians in London group is very valuable, if not nothing but hilarious, and lots of reminders of home. So those are good opportunities to meet people in very similar situations, but also a little bit of Canadiana as well.
And Joe, your tips for folks?
Yeah, absolutely. My first few months there this is all I did was network and connect. The route between the city and Westminster was well worn by me by the time I finally found my first job, because it's really just anyone that can connect you with somebody, meet them, because you don't know where that connection is going to come from. So I can't even describe how much coffee I had in those first couple of months. Yes, joining the expat groups, but if you're willing to take it a little bit further, there's the Canada UK Chamber of Commerce. They hold lots of events. You do sometimes have to buy a membership, but it's worth the investment, because I think they held something about once a month in various parts of the city with lots of different people. There's also quite a few Canadian companies with offices in the UK. And oftentimes, the heads of those offices are more than happy to help a Canadian in that field. So for me, there's lots of public affairs firms and communications firms in London, but they're actually owned by Canadian companies. So I connected with their people, and sometimes if the managing director didn't have time, they pass me off to an associate director, but then they end up connecting to two other people, and it just grows organically that way. So just the best advice I got was present yourself. Be willing to say yes to all of that, because at some point somebody's going to say, actually, yes, I do know of a job, and let me connect you with that person, and then you're off running at that point.
Excellent. So Kirsten, we have another question with a little bit about the hiring process, but I'm going to change it a little bit, because I'm sure you have experienced this since you've been over in the UK, but how's a London-based job interview versus is it different than a Canadian job interview? Is there anything that that particular that employers focus on a little bit more than what we would do in Canada, or are they basically the same?
I would say they were basically the same. For me personally, because I was going between companies, I kind of had the kind of KPMG backing, so to speak. So I don't know if my interview experience is the most reflective of what it would actually be. Sure, Rich, Joe, probably more experienced in that way. But when I have been the person interviewing at KPMG for people in my team, no, there's nothing particularly different compared to Canadian interviews, I don't think.
No. Richard, Joe, anything that from your experience?
You go ahead, Rich.
Just that I found most of my professional experiences in the UK, so I don't have necessarily a lot to compare it to, but I found them quite long. Minimum, 2 steps, maximum I've had is 5. You do meet a lot of people. So the companies I've interviewed with that have progressed, they do actually show that they're investing in you and they want to get the right person. So, you might have to repeat your story and explain yourself many, many times, but I think it's good for both parties because you do get a real sense of the potential company you're going to work for.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think both of the jobs that I held were at least four interviews, progressively higher. And then one, interestingly, had what I call a vibe check interview, where like I went through the 4, and then they said, okay, we want you to actually go to the pub with 2 of our people and just chat with them, just to make sure you pass the vibe checks. So that was interesting. I've never had that since, but luckily I did pass it, which was great. But it is a bit longer than you would find here, again, because the pool is so big when you're over in London.
So we've got a question. Oh, it just moved. Where'd it go? There it go. Okay. So we've talked a lot of each of your experiences in London, but would you ever, when you were now in reflection, either make a decision like maybe to go to a smaller city within the UK, or now that you're in London, would you ever, move to a small city or town in the UK? I'm not sure. Kirsten, what do you think?
For me personally, I think the city life is for me, but I do have kind of the privilege of the clients that I work with are in smaller cities outside of the UK. So I just came back from Cumbria, which is kind of north UK, kind of bordered to Scotland over the past few days. So I don't know, I do feel like I get that experience of being able to travel across the UK, both through work and just me wanting to explore the UK generally. But I think city life is for me overall.
Rich, what about you?
I don't think London's necessarily reflective of the UK. There's so many people in this city that aren't British. So you do need to travel and see the other towns. This country has lots of great towns. And I mentioned earlier when we were having the pre-call, that I'm kind of on a timeline to come home, and moving to another city for a year within the UK is kind of in the cards. So it's something that, still might come to fruition.
Excellent. And Joe, you were in London the whole time, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes. Yeah. Just given because my work is in government relations, they don't necessarily have the same federation that Canada has. There are other capitals, but London is where most of it happens. That said, my partner would be very upset if I didn't plug the north, which is where she's from. There are other cities out there with a lot going for them, places like Manchester and Liverpool and Newcastle. If you can get past the very thick accents up there, you can find some really good jobs. Like I know, sorry, Chris, I know you're KPMG, but my wife works for Accenture. They have big offices in Manchester and in Newcastle. And these cities are actually a lot like Hamilton, big former industrial cities that are reinventing themselves. So there is a lot going for them. And, if London isn't your taste, I loved London personally. I would live there the rest of my life if I could. There's a lot out there. And if you want small village towns, they've got those too. You just have to be able to find the job.
Yeah. So Joe, I'm going to ask you this question, then I'm going to kind of go around in a circle for everybody, but I'm going to start off with you. So did you find, because you went to Mac, then you went over to the UK, and now you're back based in Ottawa. So did you find you had to change your expectations about your career in the UK versus your aspirations for a Canadian career? And then sort of like when you came back, how much did your UK experience change what you thought your next level or your next stage of your Canadian career?
Yeah, absolutely. When I went over there, I made sure to check my expectations because I knew that I would have to prove myself at the British level. So I knew that I would have to be okay probably taking something a level below what I'd be at in Canada, to make sure that I was able to get in and then work my way up, which is what I was able to do, thankfully. And then coming back, I found that people here like to see, they think it's impressive to see something British on your CV, particularly if it's within your same realm. So for me, I got to do government relations in the UK, and people saw that here and they said, oh, that's really cool, and then you can kind of sell your international experience, but also, here's the companies I represented or people I worked for, maybe they're looking to do something in Canada, so you can help bring that in. So it helped me advance my career. It was definitely, one step back, but two steps forward when we eventually moved back.
Excellent. And Kirsten, what about you? Did you have to change your expectations of your career in the UK versus what you thought your career was going to be, or your career plan in Canada?
Yeah, so kind of similar to Joe, I think, even though to the question before about kind of qualifications and is seen kind of equivalent, I think at the end of the day, it's a completely different market. So even though I was kind of an experienced consultant at the time, and if I had stayed in Canada, I probably would have been promoted to manager a lot sooner. I had to recognize that it was a different market. There were kind of different policies that I had to be aware of for my job that going into it, I didn't know. So it was definitely still like a hurdle career-wise. So it kind of delayed, promotions that I would have otherwise gotten in Canada. But at the end of the day, it was, I think, to Joe's point, when I do eventually go back to Canada, it will say a lot having that kind of international experience. So it's well worth it your career is forever long. So, a 1 or 2 year delay is really small in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, it really is. And Rich, you're on a different path, right? Your plan is to return to Canada. So how do you think your UK experience will impact your aspirations for your next level of your Canadian career?
It's a good question. I was actually happy to listen to Joe on that, because it's one of the things I think about moving back, because I have been here so long that Canada's moved on from what I knew it as, but I think it's also about the experience. So the companies here that I've had a chance to work with, a lot of them international, so you still have ties in seeing how the rest of the world works in different countries. So I'm hoping that when I come back to Canada, they'll just see that it's a more well-rounded experience that I have, and that'll be fine. And then it's just, if you're up to date on the normal things in life, then I don't think you necessarily need specific experience from a country. It's how how you can take that experience and formulate into what you can do going forward. But it is still a big part of the thought process moving back.
Right. So Kirsten, here's a question that came in. So I'm going to ask each of you this, because I think it's everybody will have a different piece of advice. So what do you think are the most important or valuable things a person can do before they leave for the UK to prepare for the change?
Oh, that's a tough one. For me, it fundamentally came to asking myself the tough questions of why it is I want to go. I think there's some people who want to just, have be able to travel, and that's the driving factor as to why they want to live abroad. For others, it's for kind of career-oriented purposes, and that ultimately kind of is what informed my decision of moving to the UK. So as I mentioned before, KPMG has offices all over the world. So I was, I spoke to Australia, I spoke to New York, I spoke to a bunch of other offices before kind of ultimately deciding. And it was really kind of a lot of self-reflection, to be honest, on what it is I wanted over the next kind of, within the next 5 years of my career, or 5 years of my life, what did I want to see out of it, and which country most aligned to it, if that made sense. So it was a lot of inner reflection before kind of mentally preparing to make that decision to move to the UK.
And so before I go to Rich next, do you have a set timeline of how long you'll be in the UK? Like, do you have in your mind, I'm here for the next 2 or 3 years and then I'm coming back to Canada, or I'm going somewhere else?
Oh God, it's really hard. So when I originally moved to the UK, I was on a secondment for 1 year, and it's been 4 years now so that I've been here. So I guess one of the lessons learned for me has always been, however long you think you're going to be in the UK, double it at the very least. I think at the moment, in the next year or two is when I expect to come back.
Excellent. Rich, what do you think is the most important or valuable thing a person can do before they leave for the UK to prepare for the change?
I think like I said, I got a visa very easily, so the decision was made. So there wasn't a lot of kind of toing and froing or thinking about it. I got excited for it, but I think the best thing I could have done, which I tried to do, was just get the basics prepared. So, try to open a bank account, get a credit card so you start your credit history, have an idea where you want to live, talk with as many recruiters as you can. They may not be that receptive if you're away, but at least you've started that connection and you can immediately sort of have those coffees. They'll catapult you into, I think, your first jobs if you wanted them to. But if you remove all the basics and that removes the stress, you can just focus on having a good time while you're here or getting a job. That's my biggest piece of advice.
And Joe, what about you?
Yeah, a lot of what Rich just said. As soon as you are approved for a visa, then you've usually got a little bit of time when you're still in Canada, getting your CV in order and contacting recruiters almost immediately, so that they've got that and you can say, hey, I land, in 3 weeks. Let's have coffee in 3 weeks and 1 day. Although there is a time change, so you'll have to work all that out. In addition, look at some of the areas you might want to live in / can afford. I'm sure that question is coming up. So you're kind of prepared for that when it comes up. And when you actually do land, get off the plane, immediately get a phone number, and then try to open up a bank account. You can do a lot of research online. I was able to find one where all I needed to do was show my passport, and I got a bank account. That was very important, because then you can transfer your savings from Canada to the UK, and having a phone number so you can put that on your CV immediately, because I don't think anything sort of discounts a CV more than a Canadian number on there, because they don't know how to, it looks fake, compared to the long British numbers you have. So getting that SIM card as soon as you land, that helps quite a bit.
So Joe, you queued up the next sort of series of questions, because there's a lot of been questions in the Q&A about cost of living and transportation, and have you gotten used to driving on what we would say the wrong side of the road, or the British people would say the right side of the road? Is it as expensive Toronto, or is it cost of living, transportation, all that sort of stuff? Mm-hmm. Would just open it up to get your thoughts on.
Yeah, I obviously haven't lived there in a couple of years, so I think Rich and Kirsten can apply the modern context to it. But for me, yes, it's quite expensive. I've never lived in Toronto, so I don't have a comparison there. But rent is very expensive. You'll probably end up maybe renting a room first or sharing with somebody. Initially, there are a lot of things that are cheaper though. Things like cell phone plans are, you'll be shocked. You'll think it's fake when you get your first cell phone there. I found things like groceries are a lot cheaper even in London, but eating out is more expensive. You've got to factor that in. Brits do love going out to eat, and they love going to the pub. You're going to be invited to that, so make sure you budget for that kind of thing. I never drove while I was there. Transit, at least in my experience, was more expensive, but it's also an absolute necessity. You're going to take the bus, you're going to take the tube. So make sure you budget for that. Those are things that mostly stand out for me, but I'll pass it off to the people that still live there.
Yeah. Rich, why don't we go to you next about managing your budget and transportation and all that good stuff?
I think I echo everything Joe said. Some things are cheaper. Food, mobile phones, definitely. I'm a bit shocked when I go back to Canada actually and see the price of various things. But housing is a big cost. Transit, especially in London, is fantastic, but not necessarily cheap. So it will cut into your budget. And exactly how Joe said, there's a huge pub culture here. And like a lot of days after work, people will be heading to the pub. Maybe you don't want to spend your life in a pub, but it's also a great way to meet people on a bit more casual basis. So you can form professional and private relationships is there too. Travel is amazingly cheap. You can be in a foreign country, speaking a different language, completely different culture for next to nothing in a couple hours. And there's lots of sort of cost levels that go with it. A weekend away can be extremely inexpensive. So there's that part of it too. And I think a lot of people, especially me, when I first got to London, never knowing how long you're going to be here, travel becomes a big portion of your budget. So you really do need to factor that in to make sure you're enjoying the trips and also to be able to enjoy London.
Yeah, I got my cell phone bill today and I shake my head every time because I know it's much cheaper in different places of the world. I don't know how it's so expensive in Canada, but Kirsten, for you. So, probably similar what we've heard from Joe and Rich. So, what about travel? Like, have you taken the opportunity to hop over to Spain or France for the weekend? Like, have you been able to do that? Now, COVID might have had a little bit of an impact on that during your time being over there, but any advice to offer about taking the opportunity to see Europe from London?
I mean, just as Rich said, it can cost next to nothing to do that traveling. And that was honestly part of the reason why London attracted me, is just that proximity to the rest of Europe. So yeah, I mean, obviously COVID had a big impact on that, but most recently I was able to do a ski trip in Austria in January, which was great. But yeah, definitely trying to make up for lost time with COVID. And now that kind of borders are opening up and there's kind of less restrictions on tests and the cost of incurring that as well, I'm finding it's a lot easier to travel now than it was for the past 2 years.
So Rich, maybe I'll ask you this question, and Kirsten, I'll ask you this too. And you may or may not have figured this out or thought about this, but you've been both in the UK for a significant amount of time. Is there another country in Europe you could see if you weren't coming back to Canada where you'd want to work, or would be the next destination or something that our students can think about? Rich?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me, and not having done it, is the language barrier. I speak English. Hopefully you understand that. And I took French in uni and I learned a little Spanish, but that's the deterrent. If I spoke fluently another language, I'd love to live in Spain. I'd love to live in France. I have talked about with my partner moving to Switzerland because there's opportunities there. But again, there's a lot of English there. So if you can speak more than one language, there's a lot more doors open to you. So yeah, take advantage of those as well. But also after coming here, there's multinational companies where you may get short-term opportunities in countries close by. Excellent.
Kirsten, what about you?
Yeah, pretty similar to Rich. I think I have seen people who are predominantly English speaking move to Amsterdam and Berlin in particular as alternative places to Europe. So I wouldn't say, it would really be company or culture specific or the city. But that's the main deterrent really, is that ability to speak the language, and which is why London was the kind of most obvious choice or the UK was the most obvious choice for a Europe perspective.
Right. Joe, I think this next question might be, correct me if I'm wrong, because were you on a youth mobility visa? Is that what you were on? Okay, so we have a question about that. Did you find companies were hesitant to hire you since the maximum time you could stay due to the visa was 2 years?
No, but I was also fortunate in the fact that I could go in and say, I can get a spousal visa, when this runs out. So, no cost to them, but a lot of places are willing to take a chance. It's kind of on you to prove you're worth it, if that makes sense. If you go there and you've got 2 years, if you can get into the company culture, and it costs them a lot more to onboard somebody new than to sponsor a visa, because a lot of that visa sponsorship actually comes back on you. So you have to be prepared to pay that. But I think that they're willing to entertain the idea. Like Rich Kirsten said, London, I don't think I met anybody that's actually born there. It's filled with expats. A lot of people that are going to need visas are going to need assistance. So why not you? So I wouldn't let that be a hindrance. Always put on your CV or resume that you're legally entitled to work in the UK, because a lot of the times that's what they ask. And then only a few times did I hear them say, "Oh, what visa are you on?" other than that, they just want to know that you can work there, and then that's something you can discuss with your boss, sort of 6 months before you're at your end, that you can do it. And if not, there's various other ways of, if you've lived there for 2 years, you can try to find another way of finding a visa to stay there.
Okay. So we're getting close to the end of our time, and I think we've answered a lot of the questions that we had. And then, someone has just asked before I was going to ask each of you sort of a wrap-up question, but I think can you work on a student visa? I would say yes, you're able to work on a student visa when you're
Yes.
there.
Yeah, you can work. There's no limits on it, and it's unlimited exit and entry, so you can travel as much as you want as well.
Yeah. And I had asked each of you if you had an exchange experience when you were in school, which you didn't, but we have a student here who's heading out to study abroad semester this fall in the UK. Are there any smaller towns or regions you would recommend they look at or think about? Maybe not being in London for school, but outside of. So Kirsten, any areas you'd say, think about maybe going to a university there?
I think Manchester's a really cool city, and Liverpool, I think one of you guys mentioned it earlier. The other town I've heard is really cool is Bristol, which is like on the west side. Those would be Manchester, Liverpool, Bristol would be kind of my top three.
Joe, what about you?
Absolutely echo what Kirsten said. I'd also, if you're looking at going a bit further north, York is beautiful and really interesting. And then even further, if you want to look up into Scotland, like Edinburgh, are also a great place, really good culture. And what's great about England, I know people in England complain about it, but to Canadians, it's an extremely well-connected country. You can get on a train pretty much anywhere, and see the rest of the country. So if you're in Leeds or if you're in Newcastle, you can get to other parts of the country fairly easily by Canadian standards.
And Rich, what about you?
I'd echo all that, but I'd add probably the Brighton area if you want to get close to the coast. I think the other thing is people not knowing about Canadian universities. There's so many universities here, so there's really something for everyone, geographic and fit wise. So have a look around.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to wrap us up with a question to each of you, sort of like your elevator speech. Why should someone consider an international work experience? And so you're in an elevator and a student who's graduating says to you, Kirsten, why should I do an international experience? What would your elevator speech be for that?
I think it just really opens up your mind to ways of looking at problems, so how to solve them. I think if you're only exposed to certain types of people or certain types of work environment for your whole life, then how will you ever think differently? So for me, it's just a way to open yourself up to new experiences and think differently from what you've been kind of exposed to your entire life.
Excellent. Rich, your elevator speech.
I think it's just for me, it was a perfect mix of pushing me out of my comfort zone and something I wouldn't normally do to excellent career progression and learning a lot of new things. The other thing is Canada will always be there. So, try it out. If it doesn't work out, you can move on to the next role or next city, as we mentioned, but then you can always go home. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's always valuable experience professionally or in your private life towards your future career.
And Joe?
Because it's incredibly rewarding, echoing everything that's been said. It's an experience unlike any other, and not to get too existential, but you might not get the opportunity again. If to do this, like I said before, I thought that I had missed the opportunity. I was very fortunate to be able to go through, but once you start to get into a career and life starts, you might not be able to move overseas very easily. So why not do it? It's there, and you'll have lifelong experiences and memories, and might get asked to sit on a panel for your alumni group later in life.
Nice plug there, Joe. So, I want to thank everybody who's participated in our webinar today. Such great questions. You made my job very easy and ticked off all the ones that we had before. As always, if you have any follow-up questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and we'll connect you with folks like Francesca at the university or with our graduates to ask some more questions. We will have a survey at the end of the webinar that we would like you to contribute and let us know how you thought and any other future suggestions, because that helps make us deliver the programs that you're looking for. And Joe and I are colleagues at McMaster these days. Joe's based in Ottawa though, and I'm in Hamilton. So I'm going to make an offer to Rich and Kirsten. When you do arrive back, Joe and I'll host you at the McMaster version of a pub, the Phoenix, for a beer to say thank you and raise a glass for your great participation and great advice. And I think what makes these really fantastic webinars and are the conversations that we're able to do and the great advice that you were able to provide our young alumni and students who are thinking about this experience. So we'd be more than, I know Joe would join me, we'd be more than happy. It would be an excuse for Joe to come to Hamilton too, which I don't get to see him very often. So, thanks Rich, thanks Kirsten, and thanks Joe for your time and all that fantastic advice.